Hello, my name is Jim Robb, and I'm the president of the National Training and Simulation Association, otherwise known as NTSA. So welcome to the NTSA webinar series. Today's topic is transforming DoD's learning infrastructure. For those new to NTSA, we are a nonprofit association dedicated to facilitating dialogue between government, industry, and academia on topics related to providing the best possible training and education systems for our warfighters, first responders, and their families. We host a portfolio of 9 events each year, the last of which is IITSEC, the largest training and simulation conference in the world. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, NTSA, like most other organizations, have been forced to move a lot of events into the virtual world. But virtual worlds are our sweet spot. So, this is a natural place for us to work. The COVID situation is actually highlighting the value of distance learning and training in virtual worlds, and we look forward to opportunities that are associated with that. Today, we have more than 360 folks registered for this wonderful webinar from 11 countries around the world. They're tuning in as far as India, Australia, New Zealand, and all over Europe. This is very impressive. So, knowing that we have a wonderful panel coming, let me just introduce Dr. Sae Schatz, the director of the ADL initiative. Sae is an applied human systems scientist with an emphasis on human cognition and learning. She's one of the smartest people on earth and is a great friend and partner to NTSA. She's a serial best paper author at IITSEC and a dynamo of energy, drive, and passion for modernizing education, of which she is a co-author of a book. ADL and NTSA hosted IFEST last week, and it was a great success. And we think if you missed it, you can still see it on ifest.com. Today, she's assembled an all-star panel for us. So, without any delay, Sae, over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that glowing introduction. And I feel very much the same about the impact that NTSA has had on the training and education space, particularly within the defense and national security community. And I think that this webinar today will be another key milestone in that continuous modernization and improvement in this space. So today's discussion is transforming DoD's learning infrastructure. And I'll be your moderator for that. So hopefully that means that I will be facilitating the dialogue among our panelists. But before we get into that, let me give you a little context. The title, what does this mean? Well, let's start out with the first piece here. So let me go ahead and take control of the slides, and I'll move you through just a little bit of an introduction to get us started. Or I will ask Renee to advance the slides for me if that's not going to work. Renee? Thank you. So we're going to start out with what is learning? What are we talking about today? Particularly in the military context, I often hear people confuse the concept of learning with education. And certainly education is a part of learning, but really we're talking more broadly. Learning can be anything formal or informal. Formal could be an educational course, but it could also be a training event, an exercise. It can be informal, like a book or on-the-job learning. In other words, we're talking broadly about being able to develop individuals' capabilities, not just the activity, the course or the exercise or the curriculum that they're going through. Next, let's talk about infrastructure. Renee? So what do we mean when we talk about infrastructure? Specifically in this case, we mean people, processes, and technologies. In other words, we're talking about the technology to make the new generation of learning, the learning ecosystem function, and also the policy pieces, the governance, and the other kinds of improved capability that we need for the future. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So the name brand program that we're talking about today is called Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization. And if you click through that just a little bit, you'll see that we actually discussed this at last week's event called IFEST. Keep going, Renee. So the Honorable Lisa Hirschman, the Chief Management Officer for the Department of Defense, one of the highest ranked people in the entire U.S. military right now, she came in and she spoke about this reform initiative. If you go on to the next slide, you'll be able to see some quotes from her. She specifically underscored that this initiative, EDLM, is transforming how DoD provides education and training to its workforce, and that this is an important cultural shift for how the department does business. Again, if you want to go see the actual full hour-long talk, you can go see that on the IFES website. Go ahead. So I want to give you a little bit of history on EDLM to give some context. The project here, this name brand project, not the concept of training transformation or education transformation, but the actual EDLM project was really initiated back with an executive order in 2017, where the entire federal government was challenged to improve itself, to modernize for efficiency. If you go on to the next item, you'll see that the Department of Defense identified 9 areas of reform, including, go ahead, IT and business systems. And under the IT and business systems moniker, there was the learning management systems category. And so the DoD said, hey, look, we're going to look across all of the learning management systems we have, and we're going to try to improve the way we do business in that area. Now, as many of you who are probably here know, that became a whole ball of wax, right? Because when you start to pull the thread on what is a learning management system, particularly in today's day and age, is that a learning content management system? Is that the scenario system that goes with a simulator? Is that your mobile learning app? And pretty soon, the folks who are working on this reform realized that this is not just about identifying ways to have more efficient business processes. This is truly about embracing a new paradigm of learning. And so, if you click the button there, you'll see that in July 2018, the Reform Management Group under the Honorable Hirschman, so this is a very senior group of folks in the Pentagon, they approved what the reform, which is now called Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization. And that reform really has 2 parts. The first, if you'll click the button, is that we need to improve the way that DoD does its business efficiency in digital learning systems. So that means doing a better job of acquiring those systems, buying them in a bulk, efficient, shared sort of way. Doing a better job of sharing services across the agencies, and just making sure that we don't have duplications. Also, though, it's not just about money. If you click the next button, you'll see that it's also about modernization. It's really about transforming from the old paradigm of everybody has their own old school learning management system to a new paradigm, that learning ecosystem concept where data is really central and interoperability and advanced technologies have a platform that can be used across the department. If you keep going, so in March 2019, the Office of Management and Budget also was kind of on the same page, and they were issuing guidance to have more shared services. In other words, to have more organizations sharing each other's best practices and capabilities so we could have, economies of scale. At the same time, we had Ms. Hirschman and the then Director of Office of Personnel Management sign a memorandum of agreement where the Office of Personnel Management would provide some of those shared services to DoD. In other words, we could, again, get onto the same bandwagon with a lot of folks in government and leverage the subject matter expertise out of OPM to do things more efficiently. Go ahead and click one more time, and you'll see that in April of 2020, we also established an Executive Steering Committee, and that's who you're going to see today, the Executive Steering Committee for Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization. Now, of course, between 2018 and 2020, there were a lot of things that took place. There were portals that were stood up. There were efficiencies gained. There was R&D conducted. There were course catalogs prototyped. But I'm going to let the Executive Steering Committee talk about all of those advancements. Let me just introduce them to you. If you go on to the next slide. The Executive Steering Committee consists of 4 people who each represent a key aspect of the overall military learning infrastructure. And I think it's really important to point out here that you have representation from the business side and from the infrastructure enterprise system side, but you also have representation across military, civilian, and intel. Because what we're trying to also demonstrate here is that we don't all need separate systems. We can collaborate with each other across training and education, across military, civilian, and DoD IC in order to modernize together. All right, so without further ado, from the Chief Management Office, we have Ms. Lora Muchmore. She's the Director of Defense Business Systems and Enterprise Operations, and she's also the Chair of the Executive Steering Committee. Next, we have Mr. Fred Drummond. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education. In other words, he represents military training and education. Next up, we have Michelle Losalis. She's the Director of Defense Civilian Personnel Advisory Service. In other words, the civilian side of things. Although today she's going to be represented by Ms. Amy Rogers, the Chief Learning Officer for Defense Civilian. And finally, we have Mr. Jim Seacord. He's going to be representing the intelligence side. He's the Acting Director of the Human Capital Management Office out of OUSD Intelligence. So everyone on the panel, if you could you turn on your cameras and we'll get rid of those PowerPoint slides because today is going to be a conversation. Also, I wanted to point out that all of you out there in Cyberland have submitted so many questions. We received well over 60 questions for this, so there's no way we can possibly go through all of them, but we'll try to address them as we go. And if you have other questions that you think of during the broadcast, go ahead and put them in the chat window. Before we get into those Q&A, can I ask each of you just to give us a little bit of background about yourself, and also how does your role fit with this larger enterprise digital modernization project? If we can ask Ms. Muchmore to start us off, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Sae. I'm the Director of Defense Business Systems for the Department of Defense. I have about 25 years experience bringing capability, primarily information and information systems, up to the enterprise level in DoD. When I give these briefings, I typically have a slide that shows with the question, what is the enterprise? I have a picture of the USS, I'm sorry, not the US, the enterprise that was part of Star Trek, but that's not the enterprise we're talking about. We are talking about the Department of Defense as being the enterprise. And the goal is to bring where there is commonality in the delivery of business for the department, we are looking for ways to standardize and simplify that information environment for the department. Sae?
Yes, and then Mr. Drummond, could you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education Training, as Sae says, I've got the military aspect. So on behalf of the Secretary of Defense, my office handles the policies for the military force. That's both professional and personal training and education and voluntary education to include the workforce, apologize for the dog, the workforce-related skills, credentialing, and apprenticeship piece. Important because our military members accumulate skills. They've got terrific work experience, leadership attributes. Everybody wants those. Then part of our mandate by Congress and the right thing to do by our service members is take all of those military skills and capabilities and transition them to opportunities in the civilian world when those of us who have worn the uniform make the eventual transition back to the civilian world. So at the end of the day, though, it's about two things. It's about data, the collection and analysis and the use and application of data across the board to support readiness, because that's what it's about. At the end of the day, it's about mission accomplishment of the Department of Defense. So this training and education piece, the data piece, all of those are contributors to the ultimate DoD mission.
Well said. Amy, would you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Rogers. I am the Chief Learning Officer for Civilians and the Director of Talent Development. I've spent much of my career in program management, primarily in the IT field, and just saw how technology can enable our learning and empower that and being more efficient and more effective. And most recently, I had run a shared service leadership and development executive institute through the Department of Treasury and have recently come to DoD. Within my line of business, we handle 3 different, very distinct areas, but it really matters to the Department of Defense in terms of the civilians, because it is our group that develops and manages all of the policy related to training and education. We also manage the broadening programs. If you've heard of the private-public talent exchange or the McCain Fellows, it's our organization that manages those and promotes them and supports them. We also are the provider of the 5 leader development programs that are considered interagency within DoD. You know, everything from DCELP all the way to the Defense Senior Leader Development Program, plus even programs for executives through Vanguard. So we are hands-on in the developing of people as well. And most recently in April, we added a new division area that's specifically for developing the HR functional community. So our focus is now also on a specific piece of the civilian workforce, which is HR specialists, and how do we credential and develop them as well. Over.
Very good. And finally, we have Mr. Jim Seacord. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role within EDLM?
So I've been in the intelligence community for a good number of years. And as the Director of the Human Capital Management Office, I report to the Undersecretary for Defense for Intelligence and Security. We have new add-on to our name this past year. We show as a separate group, but in fact we are integrated within the department. And as Fred pointed out, the primary concerns that we have are oversight of the entire intelligence workforce, military, civilian, and contractor, and it's all about the data. And we have a unique aspect in that we also are connected to the broader intelligence community outside the department and work very closely with the Director of National Intelligence. So we are interested in being able to have insight into all of the data so we can understand the readiness of the total force and be able to advise both the Director of National Intelligence and the Undersecretary of where his force stands in terms of their skills and readiness to execute the mission.
Very good, thank you. So it's really interesting, Mr. Seacord, both yourself and Mr. Drummond and Ms. Rogers, everybody brought up this concept of I'm going to say permeability, because that's a fun word, but really, you know, this notion of how Intel really needs to work with military and how we need to think about military members transitioning. So how do you see the future of learning integrating in with some of this, you know, interoperability across people and departments?
I'll be happy to jump in first on this one. From where we're coming from, it's about interoperability. It's about common standards to allow the data flow to have a common taxonomy across the board, military, civilian, military to military. So when Navy folks talk to Air Force folks, they're talking the same language, describing the same skill sets. When any of the military talk to outside civilian agencies, to include even intelligence agencies, even though the military members, of course, are working literally side by side by the thousands with our intelligence community writ large. It's that basic understanding, basic ability to transmit information, that it's validated information, that it's in many cases secure information, it's timely information, and then the aspects of training and education are supportive elements of that. Again, looking at it from a readiness mission focus, but how do we get there? It's about the people, and then it goes back down to the individual level of training and educating the individual person, military or civilian. So it's really a very large, three-dimensional, interactive, interwoven world that we're talking about from all of our perspectives. And now we add today's technology and the technology that's in development that'll be ubiquitous in the near future. It's really expanding what we've been doing basically since forever. But now we have technology to help us process the information, to aid us in our decision making, to do the data processing. But then I come back to the basics of commonality, interoperability, common taxonomy.
Sae, I'd like to jump in on that if I may, and build upon what Mr. Drummond had said. You know, part of what we see on the civilian side is lack of awareness. What's even out there for me? What kind of training courses, what kind of development opportunities are there? What exists? And so part of this interoperability is breaking down the barriers that just even prevent line of sight of what's even out there and available to a person. It also speaks to being just in time. You know, suddenly we're now having to use Microsoft Teams and all these other technologies and things that we need that capability. And it probably exists out there already, but if you aren't connected or in that organization, you might not simply even be aware of it or have access to it. And that really speaks to return on investment. You know, money has been spent on buying content, buying systems, LMSs, et cetera. That we all work for the same department is this incredible opportunity to, as you said, have this permeability and interoperability that is just really unique at this moment in time.
And I'd like to add on to what Amy and Fred have said. You know, the whole idea of bringing information together in one place or one ecosystem is so important, and that, but I have to say it's that infrastructure below it that we need to continue to build and build upon. We have a business enterprise architecture in the Department of Defense, which helps us kind of develop a common language for speaking to each other. And as Amy had spoken about, and Fred, the idea of taxonomies and information. And Sae, you and I talked yesterday about the idea of putting together this infrastructure for this ecosystem within learning management. And I had shared with you kind of some of my experience doing this for the asset management community for the Department of Defense. And believe it or not, back in the 1990s, as we became more mature with information management in DoD, we were asking and trying to answer questions, the basic questions. How many buildings do I have in the Department of Defense? Who's using those buildings? What are we spending on them? Very critical questions for business management. But back then we had such a difficult time doing that because we didn't have a common language for speaking about our building and our facilities. Even the definition of a building differed between the Army, Navy, Air Force. And so just we could answer those basic questions, took a lot of time, took a lot of energy, and we're able to do that now because we develop common languages, taxonomies, and enterprise architectures that we're able to do that. So, you know, my goal and my passion is to use that experience and take the good work that's being done between the Intel community, the military community, and the civilian community, and say, you know, how do we develop and continue to develop consistent taxonomies and definitions so that we can do what Amy's talking about, which is provide information that is seamless, that's easy to access, and available to get to what Fred was talking about, our mission.
Yeah.
You know, we need to continuously learn and develop to support the mission of the Department of Defense. Training and education is vital to that, but that information is the basis of how we can move forward.
So I'd like to just chime in with one more thing. Intel is interesting in that we have a lot of unique authorities. Those are both a blessing and a curse. Because of the unique authorities, we decide that we can call whatever we want to in each individual agency.
So now when we're trying to pull
That's OPSEC right there, right? You just make up your own words for everything.
exactly. Whereas we try to pull things together to where we can make sense out of what we have. If we're not calling things the same things, or we don't have common standards about which we are trying to talk about an analyst or a collector of some kind, we don't know what we've got. So it is extremely important. The architecture, the infrastructure is key to linking everything together. But if the data standards aren't there, we're never going to get to where we actually have the transparency and the ability to assess the readiness of our force that we've got to have.
And Jim, I think, one of the important things is this mindset that speaking a common language is okay. And I'm sure in your community that is, a challenge. But as you and I were speaking before, as we start to live in a world where our everyday is standardized by these fancy devices, it's time for us to start thinking of that commonality and letting that be behind the scenes rather in front of the scenes.
That's absolutely right.
Well, that's so well said. And I really think that this is foot stomping the message about how we need to break down some of these organizational silos that just don't serve a purpose anymore. Does it matter that we're talking about civilian education or military training in the sense of data or data vocabularies? And at least for that infrastructure piece and for the acquisition piece, maybe not so much. And the interoperability of it all is key. If you can help me bring it home and just put a really fine point on, how does this sort of learning ecosystem, learning modernization really get us to the mission that Mr. Drummond highlighted? If you could just give me like short, what is the impact for DoD of this?
This is Amy, and I'll speak to a goal that we have in the Defense CLO Council, and it really speaks to, I think, your question, which is our goal is to develop and retain an agile, information advantage, highly skilled civilian workforce. That's what's going to deliver that. We have to have our information and in order to develop the skills and be skilled and ready in order to meet the mission. So.
And I'll add to that, it needs to be integrated with the military force structure as well, because we work together. Civilians and military are no longer separate entities. We are side by side on the battlefield. We have to be able to look across the force and understand the total force picture.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for either some of the government people who are listening right now in military departments, or maybe some of the industry folks to help us get to some of this interoperability, whether it be on the organizational personal level or on the technical level?
Say the one thing I would add to that is, we can't be afraid of enterprise. We can't be afraid of common languages. We do train and equip at the military department level, and we do that. The Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps have responsibilities for doing that. But when we talk about the business of defense, we can't be afraid of that enterprise. And putting that infrastructure in place is so important. And I just wanted to add, I even though I work business systems, when you talk about infrastructure, you talked about people, you talked about people, process, and technology. Technology isn't always our problem. And so that's what I would say to the folks that are listening and participating in this is, if there is a problem you're trying to solve, the problem isn't necessarily the technology. You need to look at your workforce, the people side, the organization structure, and the basic business process. But one thing I'd like to add is policy. A lot of times we find, and we can't be afraid to open up policy. A lot of times We see policy as something we can't touch. We see it as it's given to us. So what I ask people to think about is, as we continue on this momentum of enterprise learning, what policies do we have in place that are hindering us from getting to the true enterprise?
That's a perfect opening. One of the initiatives that we're doing in our line of business for talent development and CLO work is to reduce the number of policies and make them more of a skeleton and a framework that's both supportive and allows the departments or the military services and components to flesh out to the degree they need it to be. This is not a one size fits all. It's a sufficiently agile, flexible skeleton that enables the breadth of what we need to cover, and yet is not dictatorial or a hindrance. And so that's one of the initiatives that we're actually working on in my line of business. And they'll see it. We've got a working group that's involved, and if anybody's interested in giving feedback or being part of that, we welcome it, because policy should support and enable and empower, not hinder and create barriers.
And I'll jump in here to follow up on what Amy said. So under the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, the same direction that policy should be high level, but it really needs to set that commonality interoperability standards, but let the services determine the best way to get there. We say, here's what the outcomes desired or required are. Here's what the SecDef's requirements are. Here are your boundaries left and right to make sure that we can pass information, we can understand each other, everything we just talked about for the past 10 minutes. But go forth and prosper on your own to meet your own service unique requirements. But always remember that it's a joint force, that's an interoperable force. And as we've said, and as Jim said, we're seamless with the civilian domain also. But one example of that, I want to give a shout out to one of my folks. Dr. Jonathan Woods, as a civilian, is deployed in Afghanistan right now. And he's one of a number of several people over the past several years from Personnel and Readiness who are deployed in a combat zone. And that shows you, he got out of the Navy many, many years ago, but yet here he is as a professional military or government civilian deploying once again. So very interesting new world that we're living in from that standpoint. It shows you the total force aspect of today's DoD.
So I really, again, I would like to emphasize that the discussion that we're having here, this could be the kind of discussion you have in any kind of technology setting, except that this is specifically what's happening under EDLM. So Lora mentioned that there is a business enterprise architecture. Under EDLM, the digital learning space, the training and education technologies are being integrated into that enterprise architecture formally. And some of the work that's being done is to establish that interconnectivity for data related to, for example, courses, so that there can be an enterprise course catalog and learner records, so that data about the training and education experiences that you have had can transition from organization to organization across military and civilian, and maybe even as you leave the military. And then, Jim mentioned this necessary interoperability across with the Intel community. But what he didn't mention is that the Intel community for a while, particularly the DoD Intel and security, there I got it right, community has been working on is the integration across training and education with manpower and personnel to get to a much more integrated talent management system. So again, it's about breaking down more of those boundaries. Jim, do you have any lessons learned that you could share with us about how the DoD INS has been doing that talent management piece over the last, what is it, like 10 years or so?
So we're talking a lot. I think that we've come a long way. So the intelligence community has been very insular within itself and then within the individual elements of it over the years for reasons that are based in national security, but maybe also national security becomes an excuse. So it's taken a long time to begin to break down those barriers, and the DNI's establishment has helped a little to begin to get us to talking across boundaries so that we understand the need to share information among the elements. and begin to look more holistically at how we can deliver services of all kinds, training, personnel data, so that we are able to move people around within the community seamlessly, that the information goes with them, that we're not recreating records every time we have to. Although today we still are creating records, but at least we've acknowledged this needs to change over time. And as been pointed out before, a training record should be able to move with us, whether you're military, civilian, it's just skills. So if we move from the military to the civilian world, why do we have to start all over? Why doesn't that record just come with us and go into the civilian world as you start your new career? Same thing with civilian records. Why should we have to resign somebody from NSA and hire somebody at DIA or Navy? We should be able to move them seamlessly. So that discussion is taking place, moving the discussion to the policies that Laura's talked about, that we have to make more flexible and enduring, and then changing the cultures. And the policy is a reflection of the culture. So some of that is going to take some time, but the conversations are continuing, and we're making progress, and hopefully we will see results.
Jim brought up my favorite word, culture. And when we talk about the people side of the infrastructure, the culture we have in the department, we need to be thinking about what is the DoD or what is the federal enterprise. And that culture is probably one of our barriers to making progress as agile, as Amy was talking about earlier, and timely that we really need. I have a lot of hope that things are changing as our outside world becomes more digital, more standardized, and where we need to move.
So Fred, I'd like to tee you up just for a little bit to riff off of what Lora was saying. I know that we've had these conversations, but for everybody who's listening, what about that cultural divide that often appears between the concepts or the communities of military training, military professional military education, and the simulation-based training communities? Those oftentimes seem to have those disparate cultures. Do you think that there is an opportunity to bring them together, or?
Well, there certainly are different cultures, and there are different cultures within even one service. So my background being Navy, we have three very distinct communities, air, surface, and submarine. And they are completely different with different philosophies and absolutely unique cultures for that. So even talking across in a service is sometimes difficult for that. Each of them, using the Navy example, have their own training systems in their own training environments. But as I look at this, being in this job from a OSD Joint Force Department of Defense perspective, and I'm looking at the training piece to get to your piece, I would like to have an environment that I can have an Army unit that's a Joint Base Fort Lewis McChord, plugged into a scenario with Marines down at Pendleton, perhaps with Navy folks. They could be actually off a carrier off Southern California in a battle group. Get Air Force folks flying virtually from Nellis or Eglin or Langley. You pick your favorite spot. And they're all in the same environment for that. So that's the training piece. It goes back down to the data, the infrastructure for that. So I have to start at a very basic level. So I'm going to use this as a pitch to do a couple things. For our audience then is, from that training environment, I need common data standards. So I need, for that environment I just described, I need a one world geodatabase. So I don't have one service helicopter landing 10 feet underground in another service's simulated world. That doesn't work. I need to have everybody's database, threat database system has to have the same. It has to be the same information across the board. So when we employ the weapons in our simulated world, that the effects are real, and they're the same across the board. And now I take all that information, my goodness, let's take a look at the learning aspect, both from an individual standpoint, I'm able to collect the data, analyze it, and a unit performance level standpoint. I've now just trained in a virtual world a joint force, and I might be able to take readiness determinations off that, and I can actually improve it, which will then feed back into the training and education schoolhouses, where we may see deficiencies that we can, remedy there, or go, oh, we've discovered something new. You introduce something to that, or maybe we've even demonstrated another way that some of the stuff that we're training on is outdated in this new environment, and we can operate our world. So this larger discussion will help get to that piece for that. Again, I go down to the individual, start with the individual, the skill sets, military or civilian. But when I take it up to the DoD standpoint, then it's that macro world where everything we do, everything that touches data, everything that touches a person, is an absolute contributor to the total mission of the DoD. And I'll pause there.
So what we've heard today is a lot of exciting opportunity if we modernize our systems, if we get that enterprise infrastructure, if we really get our handles on the data and do a better job of training and educating. What if we don't do that? Like, what's the risk if we leave the status quo? Is it that we've just missed an opportunity, or do you think that there's actually an operational risk to DoD mission if we don't modernize?
I'll jump in again, and then I'll turn it over. But we are modernizing. We have been modernizing. The services have not waited for OSD for this. Again, being familiar with the Navy, Navy's really relevant learning, SEALR 2025 is exactly about everything we talked about. Started up in earnest 2015, 2016 timeframe. The other services were not waiting for OSD either. They've moved out ahead, and we're learning from each other. We've taken things that each of the services have done and expanded. The services have already demonstrated great partnerships in various elements with industry. So we're using industry standards. We have, because of what the efforts of some of the services have been doing, we have major companies I won't name, but coming to us go, ooh, we like what you have. That has a larger applicability across the board. So I would say we are doing that right now. It's been recognized. DoD is a very, very big organization. So that's part of our challenge. But again, go back, I'll repeat the standpoint of, we got to start with a common language and common understanding in the first place, and then build out from there. So I go back, I think our biggest challenge across the board, this reflects my multi-decades in this business, it's the cultural challenges that we have, that we do need to break out of the way we have been doing things and recognize that we're part of a larger world.
Sae, can I jump in on that and build upon? So a couple of things really struck me about what Fred said, which is there's so much that's going to enable and empower us to get to where we need to go, and why modernization is so important. And I am not a sports person. I don't know much about any sports, but there was a quote I heard that Wayne Gretzky said, so I know he's hockey, and he said that and I gather that this is part of the secret of his success, and it speaks to me about what we need to do in DoD, especially with learning. He said that he skates to where the puck is going, not where it is. And it really strikes me that we need to do that with learning and development. What are the competencies we need our people to have, the workforce to have? We're going to need to build upon it. We need to get there ahead rather than where are we today. I'm not against incremental improvement by any means, but we see the effects and what's happening in the world, and what we're needing to do for our own to achieve our mission in the National Defense Strategy. And we need to skate where the puck is going. And that speaks specifically, for example, to why we are in the process of updating our leadership competency model. You know, if we have competencies that are from the 90s or the 2000s, they may be fine and wonderfully foundational skills and competencies that we need our people to have. But maybe we need some different kinds of skills and competencies and abilities now, or that are starting to trend, that we need to integrate and build in, and not be afraid of, oh, we haven't had that one before, or this has served us just fine. to a certain extent, to use another metaphor, we're going to have to lose sight of the shore in order to get to where we want to go if we're going to be sailing into the future, to use a mixed metaphor. And that's part of what I do think we're going to need to do. We need to incorporate the foresight where what we need, what's coming, and anticipate and then integrate that. Just a particular passion of what we're trying to do within DoD and the civilian side. We know that the military has done a great job of building leaders, for example. And so we want to imitate that, start developing leaders from the beginning to have a culture and a mindset, the kind of innovative problem-solving skills that they're going to need, whether here in the Metro DC area or perhaps in Afghanistan, as Mr. Drummond suggested a civilian went. So there's just a lot of that infrastructure that's going to support that, and that includes competency models and the with foresight kinds of competencies that we can integrate and embed, and even looking at changing, for example, our leader development programs to involve some immersive technology, to be experiential. Learning is not just a head experience or reading a book, it's the doing and the being. And so to me, it's very holistic. So we need to incorporate coaching or mentoring or experiential assignments. And so all of that bundled together, I think will serve DoD well.
So let me ask another, please go ahead.
Yeah, jump in on that one in terms of the focus on the competencies of the future. When we talk all the time about having an agile workforce, we can't afford, with the pace of change today, to continue to do things the way we've always done them. And I'll take one example that is continuing to be fuddled, and that's the language competencies in the department, military and civilian alike. We have historically built language as the requirement comes up. So we go into the Balkans, we have to develop Serbo-Croatian languages. By the time we're done with that, we're off to 9/11 and bringing in Arabic. What do we have to do in this department to figure out how we build a competency base that is agile enough that we can respond to the changes in the world so that we're not always behind the power curve? And that goes to our whole development and hiring models that have to become more future oriented than they are today.
The skill of learning to learn is an important one that we need to have, and we need to have it now, and being able to pivot with them. Yeah,
learning to learn in a modern space where you have information coming from a lot of different sources, some of which might be suspect or incomplete, and really being able to have that metacognition to be able to self-teach, filter, and be able to continuously improve yourself. We've talked about a lot of exciting things about modernization, but there's also a pragmatic piece, and Jim kind of highlighted this a little bit when he talked about how we can't afford to continue to do things in the old model. Lora, can you also help bring it home with a little bit of the business efficiency? Because that's a big part of enterprise digital learning modernization too, even though we didn't talk about it very much during our conversation.
Sure. So we talk about efficiency. Efficiency needs to be balanced with effectiveness. And as we think about transformation, we think about reform. Of course, from an affordability standpoint, we're continuously looking at the cost of the delivery of the different business functions of DoD. But we also need to be able to maintain and improve performance. So cost, schedule, performance, the basic building blocks of business management. What are we delivering? Can we deliver it in a more, at a reduced cost, at greater performance? And then that third piece that we can't forget is timeliness. And that is bringing together, where the department is focused on its reform is as we, continue to move forward with being a cost-conscious culture.
I appreciate what you said there too about how it's return on investment, not just lowest price technically acceptable, but it's really about finding that balance between effectiveness while also being time cost and I guess just overall efficient about it.
And so one of our challenges is to define performance levels and metrics around performance. I mean, a dollar is a dollar. Thankfully, we have standardization there. Time is time, but performance is an open-ended question, but we need to continue to be thinking not just in terms of those dollars, but what do we need as a level of performance? And if you look at things such as enterprise risk management or any kind of risk analysis, performance is really important. What do I get for the different investments I put in place? And where do I have that trade space to move from one capability to another, and that capability being measured by the cost schedule performance?
You know, one of the challenges in this space, training and education, and particularly training and education technologies, has been that learning performance has not really been a key performance indicator, hardly ever, and certainly not in most contracts. You know, you're, as a contractor, you're rewarded if the simulator turns on, not necessarily if the soldiers actually learn the material. So I guess that goes to culture change. How do we fix that?
Well, there is the culture change, but, you know, one of the things I have learned, many things I've learned from Ms. Hirschman, but one of them is to understand what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, okay? And I work with my team on that all the time. What's the outcome? Because then performance becomes a measurement of the outcome you're trying to achieve. Another key business management, government, defense business management thing to keep in mind is that we also, you know, we need to have agility, we need to have responsiveness, but we also need to have accountability. And once you move towards a paradigm of measuring performance, you know, that accountability, and it's not the old-fashioned slap a hand, it's how do we reward, how do we redirect?
So we're getting down to the end here of our webinar, and so I'd like to put you all on the spot just a little bit and ask you to give our listeners here, who are going to be largely military and government personnel, as well as industry folks that are working in this training, education, technology, and simulation space, what is one actionable piece of advice or direction that you would give to the listeners on how they can help DoD modernize, both in the sense of efficiency and all of this exciting interoperability, data, culture, 21st century learning, effectiveness side of things? How do we all help modernize learning? So one actionable piece of advice. I know I put you on the spot a little bit here. I'll start us off. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
It's really this idea of open-mindedness, you know, being open to change, being open to other people's or in this case, other organizations' way of looking at things. And that is, you know, that's a great thing about our nation. We are, you know, very open and open-minded and continuously learn, but, you know, just capturing that is, I think, what I'd like, you know, my challenge to the group to be.
I would second that and add to that, if you're working within the department, look at it as a department. Look at it as a total system. Don't look at it as Navy, civilian, Marines, contractor. We're all one. And you have to open your mind a little differently to embrace other possibilities beyond what you see today.
Building up Jim's points there, interoperability. So that's my buzzword for today is for all the folks out there is always think what you're doing and what the services or whomever from DoD has asked you to do something. If they haven't approached you about, this needs to be interoperable across the DoD, help remind us, ask that question of us for that so we help move out of our own stovepipes that we're very comfortable in. Because at the end of the day, if we're not interoperable, we can't get there to where we need to go.
And if I can give a +1 to that, we at the ADL initiative work with interoperability standards a lot, and we are often seeing where vendors will come in and they'll do something for a military organization to build an interoperable ecosystem, but it's only internally interoperable. And it's all proprietary data standards and proprietary APIs. So to really emphasize what Fred said, don't just be internally interoperable. It's not just about making a stack of applications that can talk to each other. It's really about making it so that it can go to the enterprise, as Laura mentioned. All right, I'm sorry, Amy, I didn't mean to step on your toes, but I get very excited about talking about data interoperability.
I appreciate that, and that was timely. That was timely. Thank you, Sae. I'm going to build on everything that they have said with this edition of external awareness. You know, Dan Heath has a book and he talks about change, and he says focus on where things are going well, the bright lights. Shine a light on what is going well somewhere else and borrow, collaborate. So it's, in my mind, it's external awareness. Where is it happening? And then collaboration. Who else is doing it? So it speaks to the mindset, the willingness. There's no us versus them. It's we. It's external awareness and that collaboration and that willing spirit to help us all move forward because it's for the greater good.
Well, this has been a really exciting event. If I can just put a coda at the end, I would say that people are very interested in following up. I'm seeing it in the chat and I'm seeing it in the questions that people provided. So if people want to follow up, I can say that you can come to the ADL website, adlnet.gov, to find some information. Amy has also mentioned that there are some working groups that they run. And I think, Amy, you said you'd be open if people wanted to contact you.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free. Do you want me, how should we do that, Sae?
Well, I think we have everybody's registration information, so we can follow up afterwards, and we can make sure that everybody who's registered has the information on how to get involved. Laura, did you want to add anything from the CMO's office on pointers to how to get involved?
Absolutely. I think, Sae, if you, send out the information, we have the EDLM that we're championing, and we're always looking for fresh ideas. We're looking for ways to kind of build that enterprise in DoD. Thank you.
And we'll try to take the questions that you all submitted and we'll try to address them to the best that we can. There are a lot of questions, so stay tuned, monitor the website, and certainly if you have ideas, please do get engaged in this very exciting initiative. There's a place for everyone. I'd like to thank our panelists today. Thank you for being a part of this. And I'd like to pass it back to Admiral Jim Robb for the closing remarks. Thank you.
So thanks, Sae. That was a great discussion, and it really part of both of our organization's missions is getting people together to talk about these important things. And at this high level, I don't think I've ever heard that quality of a discussion about an enterprise solution. That is really wonderful. So thanks for your time and the time of your panel. This is, it's precious time, but it's important stuff, and we're all really here to help. Lots of really important points presented by the panel and yourself today. So one of the things that we've seen in the simulation business as we try to integrate simulations is the need for common everything is central to success. And so going back to basics, setting out that framework and letting people populate underneath it, industry is ready to help, and certainly both of our memberships are ready to go. We are also wasting a lot of money on everybody going their own way, and this is there is substantial savings to be had, especially in the training business and in the LMS kind of business data collection. So we're really appreciative of Ms. Hirschman's and that entire team effort to reform and to go forward. I think there's not only a good outcome, there's a lot of savings to be had. So before we go, I'd like to recognize a few of the NTSA team that support today's webinar. We have a webinar committee that's dedicated to bringing content across the year. Mr. Daniel Surfete from Aptima is chair of that committee. Mr. Bob Kleinhampel is the deputy from SAIC. Ms. Julianne Sly, CEO of Government Business Results LLC, is our key point on polling questions. Ms. Debbie Langelier and Renee Despot, who does all the hard work there from NTSA, and Dr. Linda Brandt from the ASTA Group, who's a consultant for me on strategic things. So, as I said, this is a webinar series, and a lot of it is tied together. We tried to build this one off of the success of iFest. Next month, scheduled 23rd of September at 11 o'clock, we will highlight higher education, professional education across the services. So it's the same discussion, only maybe down in a little bit more practical way. So we invite you to join us there. A lot of the things you see today, even getting the right common platform that we can actually talk about, are really essential elements of distance learning. So we're finding goods in others, and we're finding best of breed as we go. In October, on the 28th of the month, at the same time, we will spotlight healthcare industry and their response to COVID. This will be hosted by the IXL Center at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Pamela Boyers is a great ally of ours, and she's going to go through a discussion of future initiatives, but also some of what they found key lessons learned when they took on the original COVID-19 cases that you might have seen in the press. So in November, we will have an ITSEC program overview as we go through getting ready for ITSEC in later that month and forward. So again, I would say thanks for everything, and you're a great teammate, and I appreciate everything you're doing. I do want to say, go out and look at the book. She and a whole host of others are central to getting us all on the same page. I appreciate all the folks that tuned in today and participated. The questions were absolutely unbelievable, and we'll try to follow up with them. So with that, I'll close. Thank everybody for their time, and wish everyone a safe weekend. Thank you very much.